Hi everybody, welcome to another Chats with Chaudhry. I hope you're safe and well. Now today, I'm actually talking to a bit of a pharma microbiology superstar, because I'm interviewing Tim Sandle, who has very understated when I asked him what his job title. He just said pharmaceutical microbiologist, but actually Tim, who anybody who works in microbiology and pharma knows, is an expert in all things microbiology and has his own website and speaks at a lot of events throughout the year on the topics related to microbiology. So Tim, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's nice. In fact, the last time I saw you was in May in Birmingham at the Manufacturing Chemist and Clean Room Technology event. So I hope that was a good event. You were speaking there as well, weren't you?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I was covering transfer of items and disinfectant residues, and it was a great event. Yeah.
Fantastic. And today, though, we're talking about something completely different, because the reason we're here today is we are going to be actually talking about the EU GMP Annex 1 and the associated educational materials around that, because Tim recently did a webinar with RSSL on Annex 1 and some of the challenges around it, which is now available on demand, by the way. So I'll put the link to that above this video afterwards. And so we thought we'd use this opportunity to talk more about Annex 1 and what some of the challenges are. So Tim, first of all, first question for you though, for people who are not familiar with Annex 1, is what actually is Annex 1?
Okay, Annex 1 is, first of all, I mean, it's called an annex, but really it's core part of GMP regulations, and it covers everything to do with sterile product manufacturing. So that's both aseptically filled medicines and terminally sterilized medicines. And it basically sets everything you need to know from buying in raw materials through to distributing the finished product. But another interesting part of it for this time is that there's a description at the beginning saying that parts of it can apply to non-sterile product manufacturers as well, particularly those bits related to contamination. So it's a big catch-all for guidance for industry.
Right. And for those people not know, this has been the update for Annex 1 has been in the making for a long, long time. So I know every time I've been speaking to people over the last few years, they always say, we're waiting for the update, we're waiting for the update. So two questions is, or maybe one, why have regulators updated Annex 1 in the first place? I suppose that's the first question I'd ask you.
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons. I think regulators, as they go around and do inspections and they look for trends and collect data, they've established that there's a lot of gaps. They're finding similar non-compliances, so they need to go back and update the annex. So one thing about the annex is just the sheer increase in size. It's gone from 15 pages to the previous version to about 54 pages in the new version. So there's a lot more they wanted to pack in. But also, you know, pharma doesn't stand still. There's been a lot of innovations in technology, and they wanted to reflect how more modern, advanced technologies can be used to kind of protect patients, and increasing patient safety is really important.
Right.
And there's also been changes to other standards that the annex needs to reflect. So there's standards for how clean rooms are certified and developed, the ISO 14644 standards that needed to be incorporated. And also the European Pharmacopoeia has changed, you know, it's expanded the way that pharmaceutical grade water can be produced, and the annex needed to reflect that as well. So, you know, I'd say regulatory gaps, increasing standards, and trying to nudge the industry towards adopting better technology.
And to put into context, when was the original Annex 1? When did it originally come out? Because obviously it's been updated now. So how many years ago was it prior to it being updated?
Well, I mean, the very, very first version of Annex 1 was 1971, actually. But the version that we've kind of gone from to was essentially 2007. Right. There was a small update in 2009, but it was relatively minor. So essentially, it's between 2007 and where we are now in 2022.
Well, that is a big gap, actually. And obviously, as you say, a lot has changed in that time frame. So what are the three most important changes then to Annex 1?
That's an interesting question, because it's difficult, you know, some ways to distill that down. But I would say the first thing is the way it embeds quality risk management. So rather than seeing risk management as some kind of separate exercise, it kind of connects and it kind of directs as you read through it for the pharmaceutical or healthcare organization to stop and think about risks all the way through. And also not just risks plucked from the air, but it encourages scientific thinking and demonstrating things through evidence. So I think that whole quality risk management piece would be the first one. The second thing is the emphasis upon a contamination control strategy.
Right.
So rather than sort of disparate rationales and little risk assessments, it's about putting everything together from, again, the start of the process. So it could be like, which vendor do we go to supply the appropriate material, through to facility design, through to the finished formulation. And it's kind of making that like an interconnected process, which is really good. The third thing is probably around sort of like the way equipment is kind of introduced. So it kind of connects with quality by design principles. So is this piece of equipment going to be suitable? Is it designed correctly? How will we control contamination? How will it do what it's needed to be? But that's not just, doesn't stop there, because then the whole sort of life cycle approach is bolted on. So, how long is this going to be used for? Is it 5 years, 10 years? How do you know it'll still be suitable at the end? And that's particularly important for equipment that's designed to sterilize something or to create a protective area relating to sterility assurance.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about contamination risk. What has the Annex 1 said about contamination risks?
I think the interesting thing there is well, it takes the definition of contamination and puts it in a broader context. So we have microbial risk. So we've got vegetative organisms, but we've also got those organisms that can form spores, which can survive much more hardily in the environment. And the one thing the Annex calls out there is the need to use sporicidal disinfectants to get those. But there's also particulates as well. So particularly parenteral drug products that are in liquid form have to be free of visible particulates. So the Annex is saying, be careful of things like clean room clothing and certain wrappings. These can be additional sources of particulate contamination. And then we also have pyrogens, particularly endotoxin, but microbial byproducts. But there's also chemical residues as well. So the Annex focuses on segregation of activities, and where equipment needs to be shared, that there's robust cleaning validation in place as well. So it captures quite a broad array of different forms of contamination.
Right. And you mentioned contamination control strategy. So how should people approach designing a contamination control strategy?
Well, there's no one size fits all. Every facility is unique, and I think to a degree the Annex recognises that. But to my mind, it needs to be something that's conceived of as both vertically and horizontally. So I always picture like pillars coming down. So each pillar would be a key area. So it could be equipment design, it could be premises, things like clean rooms, it could be materials, how processing is done. So it could be then saying, okay, think about the process, what needs to happen with hold times. Then it could be environmental monitoring and testing. But equally, it needs to be thought of as horizontal as well, because one thing the Annex is trying to get at is this kind of holistic approach.
Sure, so connecting everything together, isn't it?
Yeah, what happens in a grade D area could affect what goes on in a grade C if you start getting bioburden increasing, or how items get transferred. And then also stopping to thinking, like who should be there, how many operators, what they should be wearing, how well trained they are, what level of cleaning and disinfection, what needs to be sterile. So it's kind of a crisscross pattern. And and a kind of series of interrelated modules, I think is the best way to conceive it.
Right. Now, you also talked obviously that the update was there because there's been a lot of new technology. So how has the Annex embraced new technology?
I think there's quite a number of areas, but I think there's probably three things that spring to mind. The first thing is barrier technology.
Right.
So that's the concept that people, obviously the biggest source of contamination in clean rooms. So anything we can put in place to create a barrier between people and product is important, and that becomes of increasing importance the closer we get to manufacturing the finished product, and certainly when we're filling medicines. So this is where the idea of closed RABS devices, so that's restrictive access barrier systems, or isolators, come in, which
Sure.
will have unidirectional grade A airflow and also have means of decontamination. So there's a very strong nudge that the days of open RABs or hand filling or doing things under sort of LAF cabinets is gone, and we've got to embrace barrier technology through gloves. The second thing is the realization that a lot of the industry are trying to adopt single-use sterile disposable technology, or sometimes abbreviated to SUS. And these are the pre-sterilized plastics that can come in. So that's everything from mixing vessels through to aseptic connectors. But although the Annex encourages these, it does send out a couple of warnings. It says that you need to make sure that you're happy with the sterilization method, and the sterilization method doesn't make these devices more fragile.
Sure.
And also that you've had a look at the reaction between the product and these devices. So leachables, extractables, absorbents are all things that are called out. And the third area, which perhaps is more of a particular personal interest, is the encouragement to use rapid microbiological methods.
Right.
So it's a recognition you don't have to use the traditional agar plates and the classic methods that have been around for 100 years. There are now new technologies available, and there's encouragement to consider those as well, and there seems to be a lot of regulatory acceptance around those sort of technologies.
Right. It's interesting you said that when you brought it up, obviously we hadn't spoken before, and I was going to ask you about single-use technologies because obviously, like you said, there's been a massive growth in that over the last few years. The other thing I was going to ask you though is, you're talking about new technology, but what about, you talk about isolators, but also there's a lot of automation now coming into play within pharma. So does it cover anything related to automation within it?
Yes, I think there's, again, if you say, think about the isolator, I mean, although a lot of isolators are still reliant upon the use of gauntlets, the Annex does call out that the gauntlet or the glove is a weak area. So if you can eliminate that and say adopt robotics, then that's very much a future model. And automating processes and gathering as much data in real time is also important. So the Annex talks about monitoring alarms, carrying out some testing on the shop floor. So that kind of ties up with the FDA's PAT, or Process Analytical Technology Initiative, as well. So the more quality we can kind of build in, the more we can automate, the more we can take out the human factor where possible, then the more reliable and robust processes can be.
Right. Now, can you give me an example though, of how risk assessment can be applied in relation to Annex?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few areas, but I think one that springs to mind in that the Annex singles out transfer disinfection as a particularly vulnerable area. So it talks about how materials get in, particularly into sort of grade B clean rooms and then into grade A. So it has a hierarchy of methods. So it says that sterilization by heat is still the most reliable and robust method. But beyond that, there are also alternative ways. So there's the use of decontamination chambers, which could use, say, vapor hydrogen peroxide technology, or there's the sort of classic transfer hatches. So one thing the annex is there is saying, well, okay, if you're in grade C, how are you going to get something into grade B? How are you going to design that hatch? What kind of airflow are you going to have? How many layers? So let's think about single use again. If you're getting a single use item in, how many layers of wrapping are needed if you're going to remove a layer through each clean room grade? And then at what point do you need to, say, apply a sporicidal disinfectant? How are you going to apply that? Can you get that across every surface? How long does it need to remain within the hatch for its contact time and to be flushed with clean air? And then also things like, is the material compatible? Are you actually going to damage the material if you're going to use this particular method? So I think it's very much about, what are the hazards? How might they occur? What are the means for them to happen, or vectors? And how you're going to reduce those risks down? And what kind of controls are you going to have in place? How do you actually verify that the risks are actually being managed to a low level?
Right. Okay. Now, obviously, like you said, there's a lot of additional requirements now in the new Annex 1. So what are the training implications for that in terms of the changes?
I think there's a lot of emphasis upon training in general, and I think regulators have been concerned about the level of training. And that might sound odd for people in pharma because they probably think they do lots and lots of training, but I think it's sort of the quality of the training. And I think it's just not just training, but what the annex is signaling is also the importance of knowledge and experience. And it particularly calls out sort of 3 areas. One is that those working on with sterile products need to have a degree of microbiological knowledge,
right.
And that means that even the operator performing the most simplest function still needs to understand what contribution they personally can make towards contamination.
Right.
So why they have to wear these strange clothing and put on goggles and masks, or why they need to clean in a certain way. And all of that basic understanding is really important. So microbiological knowledge at all levels is important. The second area is there's also a requirement for people to have basic understanding of engineering as well. So that's how we can design quality, how things can go wrong, what the impact of something going wrong can be in terms of cross-contamination. And then the third thing is just kind of putting all that together, because it's kind of a signal for QPs. And here it's saying that if you're going to be signing out a batch when you're doing your batch review, it's not just what's in front of you that you need to be concerned about. You have to have a broad understanding of all the risks within the facility. So there's lots of things like quality of water, quality of air, some forms of bioburden testing that don't necessarily hit the batch record, but the kind of knowledge, skills and training of the person doing that task has got to be top notch.
Right. And I suppose my final question is then, when does Annex 1 come into effect, and how can pharma companies prepare for this?
Okay, so officially Annex 1 comes into effect in August 2023.
Right.
Apart from that, there's one paragraph which is delayed until 2024, which is to do with control of freeze dryers and
right.
Sterilisation of those. However, a lot of inspectors are using Annex 1 now. So they're saying, okay, it might officially come into effect in 2023,
Sure.
but really you should be applying a lot of these principles now. You've had the drafts, you've had a big build up to do so. So that becomes a challenge. How people adopt it. I mean, obviously, some companies are going to be further ahead than others, but unfortunately, it's really important. You're just going to have to read it paragraph by paragraph, clause by clause, and stop and think and say, am I in control? Do I have something that can show I'm in control? And if the answer's no, I'm in control, but I don't have anything, go and write something and link that to the contamination control strategy. If you don't have something, then build up a list of the gaps. And then, depending on how many there are, kind of put those in some kind of risk priority order, raise CAPAs, and then start chipping away at it and get to a position of compliance. Because, you know, at the time we're recording this now, around November time, you know, we've already used up 3 months of the implementation, and
Sure.
August 2023 is not very far away.
Well, that's a scary thought, isn't it? It's not very far away.
No.
But going back to what point you just said, though, just now, where you said that officially it doesn't kick into effect till August 2023, but inspectors are sort of checking now and seeing if you're doing it. What are the implications then from a, you know, from a company's point of view if an inspector does find that you aren't complying to Annex 1 now, even though it's not officially kicking off till August 2023?
I think it depends on what the issue is. So I think
Right.
if it's if you're using some older technology and the annex really infers you should be using more modern technology, if you've got a risk assessment, then it's more likely to be, and you've got a plan to move to the new technology, then it's very much like, okay, we may not be overly happy, but you're meeting the current regulations, you've got a risk assessment, you've got something in place. But if it's something that's a major gap, then there could be issues, because even under the older annex, it still had very kind of loose terminology
Right.
about risks, about control. It's just that with the current annex, it spells it out more. But you know, you've still got a duty of care to ensure a controlled environment and protect the patient. So everything's on its own individual case, but you've got to have something to back up what you do, really.
Yeah. So the key note for viewers is, if you're in pharma and Annex 1 affects you, then you need to make sure you're up to date as ASAP. And actually, that segues nicely to say, well, Tim, thank you very much for giving me that great overview, because I've heard so much about Annex 1 over the last few years. Okay, we're waiting for the update, and I know it kicked off, officially announced in August, at the end of August. So it's good to get a proper overview of it. But viewers, if you'd like to know more and also help yourself get up to speed, then obviously you can first of all check out Tim's on-demand webinar that he did with RSSL to get more information. And RSSL are running a series of webinars around Annex 1 all of next year with Tim's help. So you can check that out as well from the RSL website. They also offer training, so you can check that out at the same time. And also you can check out Tim's own website, because I'm sure he's got lots of information on his website. Well, I'll put the link to that as well. So Tim, genuinely, it's been lovely to see you again. And thank you for giving me such a great overview of Annex 1. I feel far better informed than I was, say, 20 minutes ago. So thank you very much for that.
It's a pleasure.
And viewers, I hope you found that useful. And if you've got any questions, actually, based on what Tim has said today, then please feel free to put them in the comments below the video, because I'm sure Tim would love to see it, as would other people, I'm sure. And I'm sure we'll be happy to respond to that. Or you can contact Tim or RSSL directly, because the links will be above the video for that as well. So Tim, all that's let me say is thank you very much. I hope you have a great end to the year. It's lovely to meet you in person again. And viewers, thank you for watching. And until next time, as always, stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.